we're pointing blame at our president when it is the president of Russia.
He says Armageddon. That means both sides hit the world. That means we all hit. Both sides. Wait, you mean the United States and Russia?
This is read Pollock's book. Starts with one nuclear tactical weapon. Then the other guy has another tactical nuclear weapon that's 1% more. Then the other guy has two tactical nuclear weapons.
Knows that everybody gets
the end
destroyed.
of the world.
Everybody knows that, but the point is, Saudi Arabia can be a country of snakes. Putin can be crazy, but we've got a president who is reacting like crazy, as opposed to reacting as a dignified leader of the greatest country on earth.
Look at Ukraine's army.
I don't care about Ukraine. Go ahead, Mindy.
His words need to exemplify that. What he's doing is he's gaslighting instead of keeping people calm. Yes, we're strong. Yes, we will control this. Let the people feel that. Let our enemies know that.
If we're on the verge of what you described, I hope we can have sobriety and clarity in leadership.
Yeah, and not
but
elections are coming.
Shouldn't we point to where the blame is? Isn't the blame on Putin?
Okay. Coming up, Kanye West tearing into the left for trying to silence free thinkers during his explosive interview with Tucker, and we've got an exclusive new clip.
So wake me up when it's over.
Boat in order to escape the Russian draft. And they're not alone. We're going to go live in Kazakhstan, where thousands of Russian men have been arriving every day for weeks. Then, the head of the National Women's Soccer League says there are new reports of misconduct that have come out in the days since that bombshell independent report. Stay with us.
Is on the line.
Every race. Every vote.
To support and defend the Constitution. He needs to know from you that you are with him. If he does not do it now, while he is commander-in-chief, we're going to have to do it ourselves later in a much more desperate, much more bloody war. Let's get it on now while he is still the commander-in-chief.
It's chilling to hear that in light of the fact that 3 weeks and 6 days later, January 6th happens.
Yes, it's extremely chilling. And I think one of the other things, too, is the verbiage that he is using. Several things. He's really invoking the military, quite frankly, and he's invoking veterans. We have to remember that the Oath Keepers, a report came out, I think it was last month, about 2/3 of them are either former military or former law enforcement, and about 10% of them are active duty military or active law enforcement. And I find that to be deeply concerning. Their name itself is really a play off of the oath that former law enforcement officers like myself took to the government to really obey the president and enforce the laws of the United States. And he's really playing on that and galvanizing this group of people to formulate these tactical teams, basically, to go out and to commit these acts. And we have to remember, and this is a word that isn't being used a lot, and I'm a bit frustrated by it, but the fact of the matter is groups like the Oath Keepers, groups like the Proud Boys, folks like Stuart Rhodes, they are domestic terrorists, and we're scared to use that word, but that's really what is going on here. And they are committing terroristic acts against the United States government. And I think we really do need to call it what it is. And we also don't have a federal charging statute for domestic terrorism, which makes it sometimes difficult to monitor the activities of these organizations.
Why do you think we struggle with, Ted Cruz, of all people, described it as domestic terrorism. Why, Tracy, do you think we struggle with using the right words?
I think that's an excellent point. It should be something that is sort of bipartisan. I think the problem is terrorism has become politicized. I worked counterterrorism at the FBI. I worked counterterrorism at the CIA, but I worked it during a time where we sort of had across the board political approval and political support for these issues. And I think it's really difficult sometimes to call something a terrorist that looks just like you. I'll just be very frank about that. And I think that's where we struggle with that sometimes, is we don't want to recognize that there's folks that are our neighbors and people that we see and know that could be part of these groups committing these acts.
I think the other thing, Tracy, and I'm glad you raised this, the other thing is I think that politicians in both parties, including the Democratic Party, have a hard time describing Trump supporters as domestic terrorists. It is true. Christopher Wray and Ted Cruz told us it was true, but it is still something that everyone sort of choked on before they can get it out of their mouths.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Look, do not think every single person that supports Donald Trump is a domestic terrorist. I've never thought that. But I think, again, nobody wants to be labeled with that, and no one wants to think that their cause is wrong and that their cause is terroristic. And a lot of times we align that with international terrorists like Al-Qaeda, and that's really difficult for folks to sort of wrap their brain around.
Yeah, but I guess the only other thing, all the domestic terrorists involved in the attack of January 6th were Trump supporters. None of them were there having attended Biden-Harris rallies as part of the journalist. I want to come back to the trial, and I want to show all of you something that Nick Quested testified to before the January 6th hearing. And the intersection here is that we don't have access to the evidence DOJ has developed, but in a parallel track, Congress has been investigating January 6th, so we've exposed to some of the things that may be on the table. Let me show you his description, having been embedded with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, of the violence of that day.
I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity. And for anyone who didn't understand how violent that event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it. I heard incredibly aggressive chanting, and I subsequently shared that footage with the authorities.
Brian Riley, tell me what the prosecution's strategy is. The seditious conspiracy and the evidence that's been presented so far, as we've been discussing, backs all the way up to November. It's the planning, it's the preparation, it's the willingness to use violence, and then it's what Nick Quested testified to, the actual violence that ensues that day. What in your view will be sort of how will the pie be made up in terms of the case the prosecution makes?
Yeah, I think that where the challenge in this case probably comes in is whether you get jurors to think that because there wasn't necessarily violent acts from these individual Oath Keepers, and I should say one of them shoved an officer. There's a couple other moments where there is, physical contact between officers, but there's not, this sort of barbaric violence that we saw necessarily on the Wood Front in a lot of these Oath Keeper cases. They were mostly focused on the East Front, which was chaotic, but relatively speaking, calm compared to what was happening on the West Front, where officers were literally being dragged down the stairs by the back of their neck. You didn't have that level of violence on the East side. And I think what essentially the defense is going to do is say, look, they were assisting law enforcement officers. I heard a story earlier this week about this one instance that some of the defense lawyers have pointed to, where there's an individual who was a former retired law enforcement officer from New York, who was associated with the Oath Keepers. He was a member, he had signed up online, but was not in communication with them that day. I spoke with him, and he was not in communication with the individuals who were charged in connection with the criminal conspiracy, but he assisted law enforcement that day. And that's something that I think that they're going to try to take advantage of, because the Oath Keepers, as we've mentioned, are made up of former members of law enforcement, former members of the military, and have done some, have aided citizens in some other scenarios. There was a mention of hurricane relief, for example, in the trial this week. In other scenarios, they have been trying to come to the aid of law enforcement, and apparently we're in communication with the Secret Service and escorting folks in and out of those things. So it really is a little bit jarring, I think, to see somewhat of what the Oath Keepers, members of the Oath Keepers, some of them believe the organization is about, and then what the direction that Stuart Rhodes and this group allegedly took, which is, overthrowing the U.S. government. And you certainly have language from individual defendants who are charged in this case, which is definitely going to be in support of that, and makes it look as though they are a part of this broader mission to attack the U.S. Capitol, especially those Zello chats, for example, where you hear Jessica Watkins, for example, celebrating going inside. But the violence from the Proud Boys is a lot more extreme, I think, than you see from the Oath Keepers who have been charged in connection with this case. Which this has been a slow boil case. But when you do have 3 cooperating defendants who say that this was an act of seditious conspiracy that they were a party to, that does definitely really improve your odds at a jury trial. And obviously DOJ is batting 1,000 at jury trials so far. So this could be their biggest challenge yet to date, Nicole.
And I think people understand the difference between a noble pursuit like hurricane assistance and an illegal one like a militia. Josh, I want to read from some of your reporting of Keeper's trial. Here's from members troubled by rhetoric before January 6th. I think there's history in mob prosecutions and otherwise that it is the insiders who are usually most persuasive with a jury. And here's what an Oath Keepers insider testified to, quote, "The whole thing was so threatening. Rashid said it was scary, but they were proposing be brought to the table. You know, we're going to take over the White House. If you bring guns, it's okay. Kick Antifa's butt." It sounded horrible. The name when I joined. He said he repeatedly tried in the days that followed to relay the recorded a call from the Oath Keepers to the FBI, DC Attorney General Carl Racine's office, and the U.S. Capitol Police. "Did anyone call you back?" Prosecutor asked. "Yeah, after it all happened," he replied. Are these the kinds of witnesses from our Oath Keepers that we should expect to hear from in the trial that tried to sound the alarm ahead of time?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard several of them. I don't know if it's fair to say that they all tried to sound the alarm, but at least one did there, and a couple backed away from the group, because they were concerned about what was going on. But I do think it's a bit of a double-edged sword for prosecutors, as Ryan is alluding to. If people get up on the stand and say, when we were just helping, women and children and hurricane victims, and then suddenly it took this turn, it could possibly aid the defense in that, some defendants, maybe not Stuart Rhodes himself, may be able to say, well, that's why I got involved too, and maybe something went wrong on January 6th, but somehow they were not party to the more nefarious parts of this. I think that's the defense we're going to start to see play out, and the prosecution is going to argue that, what you see in the Oath Keepers' public appearances is not on the level. People like Stuart Rhodes were saying, well, we're here to protect folks from Antifa and BLM. But behind the scenes, he was saying, let's dress up like single parents with a baby carriage and have a bunch of weapons in the baby carriage when Antifa comes after us. So some of them were spoiling for a fight, even back in those events in September and November of 2020.
We are so grateful that you're both in the courtroom for this. We'll continue to monitor it here. Ryan Riley, Josh Gerstein, thank you so much. Tracy Walter, thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you all for starting us off this hour. When we come back, from threats at home to threats abroad, President Joe Biden with his starkest warning yet about Russia and what Vladimir Putin might do in the face of all these military defeats in Ukraine. Plus, with a month to go ahead of the midterm elections, Democrats are forcing Republicans into a tough choice, whether or not to address their party's draconian and unpopular stance on banning abortion. For some Republicans, it is a test they are failing every day. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
People. And if I just may finish this thought. I'm going to use inflammatory language, but I don't care because I think this is exactly how ugly it is. There are overseers on this plantation that do not want an independent black man to have an independent thought, and they're willing to destroy his reputation for exhibiting that independence. And it is about the ugliest thing I can imagine, to deny a human being their individuality, to form their own opinions because of the color of their skin. It is beyond ugly.
You've been around the block enough, Will, to know that Kanye West is a provocateur. He is doing this to get a reaction. I remember very clearly Katrina, 2005. And he said, George Bush doesn't care about black people. So that was Kanye West also, but he was on exactly the opposite side.
Are you saying he's inauthentic? Just to be clear, are you saying he's inauthentic?
I am saying that when you have someone who is an artist and a performer and an entrepreneur, how much of what they're saying do they really believe, and how much are they saying for impact and effect? He knew, Kanye, sitting down with Tucker, first of all, why did he choose Tucker to do this interview? He knew that of all the people that make liberals craziest, Tucker Carlson would be the guy. So there he sits with Tucker Carlson, and he has the pendant that Jesse referenced, but it doesn't have like a fetus in it.
It's an ultrasound.
I mean, now, do people do that? Do people wear aborted fetuses necklaces?
No.
And then
Even if you take all of that aside, and I think that everybody wants to say that there's something wrong with him and how could he do this, and he had a lot to say. What I took away from it was, here is a minority male that is expressing conservative views. What I don't want is him being highlighted as an exception to the rule. there are a lot of minorities out there, African Americans, Hispanics, Indians. There are a lot of minorities out there who think like he does. And Republicans have to understand we have to expand the tent. There's a lot of Kanyes out there. He can only express it the way he did, but I hope that we go and start really recruiting the rest of them, because there are a lot of, especially African Americans, who saw during COVID that, here you've got liberals who think they can't pick the school for their children, or they think that they can't go to the DMV to pick an ID so that they can go vote. Minorities have been treated poorly by the Democrats for a long time. This is Republicans' time to really seize the opportunity to have the discussion with them on why we focus to lift up everyone, not just a certain segment of the population. Up next, President Biden giving out blanket pardons to marijuana offenders ahead of the midterms. But could it backfire?
People remember ads with young people having a good time. So to help you remember that Liberty Mutual customizes your home insurance, here's a pool party.
Good times insurance.
Only pay for what you need.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Type 2 diabetes? Discover the power of 3 in the Ozempic Trizone.
I like you, kid. You're a good guy.
In my Ozempic Trizone, I lowered my A1C, CV risk, and lost some weight.
Ozempic provides powerful A1C reduction. In studies, the majority of people reached an A1C under 7 and maintained it. Ozempic lowers the
quote, direct threat of nuclear weapons being used. President Biden went on to say this, quote, we've got a guy I know fairly well. He's not joking when he talks about potential use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons, because his military is, you might say, significantly underperforming. The off-camera comments from President Biden are the most frank assessment he has offered since the war began in February. And they go further than many members of his cabinet or administration have gone when talking about the threat of nuclear weapons being used by Putin. It gives us an inside look at the worries of not only the United States, but the world, as Vladimir Putin is slowly being humiliated and backed into a corner amid staggering and embarrassing losses on the battlefield. Joining us are two experts, our two favorite experts, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia and MSNBC International Affairs analyst Michael McFaul, and retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, former Director for European Affairs for the National Security Council. Ambassador McFaul, I worked for a president who had a penchant for saying more blunt things when he wasn't behind a podium. And sometimes it's just interesting to see the delta between the interagency approved messages for a global stage and what a president really says about another leader, especially one.
Alexander Vindman.
Back and tell me you think people are overreacting.
See, they want to arrest my friend Alex Law because he likes Alexander Vindman.
President Biden too.
You know what?
A long time ago.
I'm not going to let him arrest Alex. Because Vindman and Alex like each other. They're good people.
Second, I think what he said is what they have been thinking about from the very beginning of this war. Remember, Putin threatened to use nuclear weapons at the very beginning as well. I wrote 2 op-eds about it, by the way, 6 months ago, because it was so scary. And I think we want our leaders to be worried about such things and doing everything they can to reduce those probabilities.
Colonel Vindman, tell me, I looked through Twitter and I know some of your reactions, but take all of our viewers through both your reaction to the president's comments and your assessment of the likelihood that Putin would do that.
Sure. So I think this is an extremely high consequence, a catastrophic event, and therefore we have to take it seriously. This administration has been thinking about it consistently. I think you could see that in the fact that this administration has been measured, or in some cases really maybe very reactive and slow to respond because of that nuclear threat. But it's also a extremely low probability event. And on that basis, we have to be both ready to warn off Russia, to make sure that they know that we're serious, we're prepared to defend certainly NATO and the US against nuclear weapons, and also to warn them against the significant change in the way we will respond to Russia's nuclear weapons use in Ukraine. But we also should understand that the interest for Putin to conduct this nuclear strike are limited. He has few relationships left with Russia, with China and India. He would burn those relationships. It's already very uncomfortable for China and India to have relations with Russia. With a nuclear strike, that he would ruin that. And then there's also the understanding of when this would be used. Nuclear weapons are supposed to be used in a case of existential threat. That means kind of a clear and present danger. Moscow is encircled. NATO is attacking you. That's when you use nuclear weapons. When there are nuclear weapons flying towards Russia, that's when Russia uses nuclear weapons. In reality, this is not a clear and present danger. Putin is more likely to look at options that preserve options for him and let him fight another day. And therefore, I think that this is a very, very full-throated bluff to try to get the West to deter. But he's not ready to do this, nor are there indications and warnings that he's really close to doing anything with nuclear weapons yet.
Yeah, I mean, Ambassador McFarland, I'm the most dangerous kind of pundit on this. I know what I know from reading the paper and from having been in the government a long time ago. But my sense is he has all these domestic pressures now, a wildly unpopular semi-draft, a wildly unsuccessful and humiliating war in Ukraine, and a massive amount of dead Russian soldiers. And I want to get your thoughts to that, and then I want to share with you some reporting about. We don't see a lot of this, but some dissent and strife within Russia. So first on, is this the moment when he's so weakened domestically that he uses the nuke?
Well, he's definitely weakened domestically. He is definitely upset with how his army is performing in Ukraine. He was upset 6 months ago, and he's even more upset today. It has not been going well for a long, long time. Remember, we've all forgotten about the Battle of Kiev. He lost that many, many months ago. So that's clear. Second, there is more public backstabbing now happening in Moscow than ever before. I think it was probably happening behind closed doors. Now it's out in the open. He's feeling that pressure too. But third, some people jump from that to say, well, he's a rat in the corner. He has nowhere to go, and therefore he has to use a nuclear weapon. And that's the logical step. And again, maybe he's not being logical. We always have to worry about that. But I don't see what would be the upside for him of using a nuclear weapon. As Alex said, how many leaders around the world would support him? Zero. How many Ukrainians would get on television the day after a nuclear weapon was used in their country and say, well, because we've been attacked by this nuclear weapon, we need to capitulate, we need to surrender? Zero. Nobody's going to say that. How many of people in Putin's own inner circle would say publicly that they supported this decision? I think it would be very few, if not zero. I just hope Putin understands everything I just said.
Yeah, I mean, he's insulated, but he also monitors both of your statements pretty closely. So I want to ask both of you about this reporting in the Washington Post. A member of Putin's inner circle has voiced disagreement directly to the Russian president in recent weeks, according to the Post, over his handling of the war in Ukraine, according to information obtained by U.S. intelligence. The discontent that the member of Putin's inner circle expressed related to what the insider considered mismanagement of the war effort, mistakes being made by those executing the military campaign. The insider's identity could not be confirmed, though the name has been included in the U.S. intelligence reporting. So, Colonel Vindman, you know what the classified version of this looks like. Take us through what this means and its significance. I mean, I'm not saying you have access to this right now, but when you were in the government, this is the kind of intelligence that people who work these issues. I didn't mean to. I misspoke. But this is probably solid information coming from our intelligence community. That there is at least one person who is voicing disagreement to the ambassador's point to and around and very close to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, if there is this person, this is a very courageous person, because this first person that actually speaks up is going to be the person that, basically he's the one that Putin's going to send a message to the rest of the inner circle. What happens if you stand up to him or you challenge him? So it's interesting that this is coming out. I think this administration has actually been very good about keeping it secrets. It's been tight-lipped, but this one's out. There's some motivation to kind of sow additional discord within and fears about the inner circle being critical of Putin. So I think that might possibly be why we're hearing about this. And in fact, there is quite a bit of rumbling now amongst the business elites, amongst the political leadership within the Duma, the parliamentary body. There have been some critics. I think this is starting to bubble up in a way. These are the early days, nowhere near risking Putin's regime, but these are the early days of kind of a growing discontent, magnified by sanctions being harsh and getting harder as the winter weighs down, and military defeats. So all this is going to come together to make Putin's decisions about escalating pretty challenging without clear path to victory.
Former Ambassador Michael McFall and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, thank you both so much for joining us today on all this. When we come back, there is breaking news to tell you about. It has to do with Georgia's Republican Senate candidate Herschel Walker. The New York Times breaking a story in the last few minutes that says that the woman who says Walker paid for her abortion in the year 2009 also says that Walker urged her to terminate a second pregnancy 2 years later. That brand new reporting, what it means for the Senate race and the balance of power. After a quick break, don't go anywhere.
I totally disagree. It's not a big deal.
I'm going to explain to you why it's not.
How many people went to jail for half a joint?
There's no one in federal prison right now for possession of marijuana. There's not one person.
This involves 5,000 to 6,000 people, but it's a lesson.
I'll explain it to you, so you'll understand it's not a big deal. This involves 5,000 to 6,000 people, not Toronto. I knew you wouldn't like that. This is 5,000 to 6,000 people, not who are in jail, but who have their records expunged so they can get jobs, so it doesn't sit on their record. And you know what? You know what, though? I'm fine for second chances in society. Here's why it's not a big deal. Because this is like student council running something but a Coke machine in the Commons. This is what's going on with student loan forgiveness with this marijuana program. He won't talk about fentanyl because it is a big deal and he can't solve it. There's no cheap votes to get. It's tied to our border policy and it's tied to our China policy. So we can't solve fentanyl. It's hard. He won't talk about it. He'll talk about marijuana because it's cheap and easy high fives when it isn't actually a thing that is plaguing this country that he can correct.
I think this younger generation just does not understand what happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and how many people had their lives screwed up behind a dopey pot bust. Ahead, the Biden White House trying to flip the defund script and accuse Republicans of being anti-cop.
Mentioned, but he's been able to at least criticize his party figure, right? Blake Masters, that's a lot more difficult to do on the Republican side, and you saw that last night in the debate.
Donald Trump lost Arizona, okay? Yep. And he lost the general election. I mean, that's the reality.
Thanks, one and all. Appreciate it. And tonight, in a CNN special report, I'm going to talk one-on-one with key witnesses from the January 6th Committee's investigation. American Coup, the January 6th investigation, airs tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern, only on CNN. Coming up, a second 16-year-old Iranian girl dead after joining the protests against the regime. This time, Iranian officials say she intentionally jumped off the building. Stay with us.
Will you change? Will you make something better? Will you create something entirely new? Our Dell Technologies advisors provide you with the tools and expertise you need to do incredible things. Because we believe there's an innovator in all of us.
We all know that we'll eventually...
Attention, did you or...
So please leave you guessing.
MailChimp, take the guess.
I was pretty upset, pretty depressed for a number of years. With the brain injury, I spent a year and a half rehabbing on active duty and then another 3.5 years rehabbing at the VA. Through the VA Adaptive Sports, they do what's called a New England Winter Sports Clinic, and one night they introduced sled hockey. I spent like 20 minutes on the ice. I had horrible balance. I was falling over left and right because, I mean, who could skate like that? But it was pretty incredible, and I loved it. I went and tried out for the national team 6 months after testing it for the first time. I was really there just to like learn, see what else I needed to work on. Making the national team definitely changed me as far as my confidence, my outlook on life. My old house was 3 stories, so crawling to do the laundry, crawling to go up to bed. None of the doors were wheelchair width. This home is incredible because it is totally wheelchair accessible, so every aspect of it I can do for my wheelchair. The cabinets actually pull down to wheelchair height. The stovetop lowers to wheelchair height. The doors have automatic door openers. You know, everything is flush, all the transitions. There's no lips or ridges anywhere. I started training dogs about 9 years ago. Most of the dogs are service dogs, but we also have therapy dogs in our program. We've had 1 graduation so far, and we have 28 dogs in our program right now. If another vet or anybody gave me a call about Tunnel Towers, I would absolutely recommend them, knowing that it truly does benefit us and go to good people and make a difference in veterans' lives. It's amazing.
The 10th biggest in, the new All-American Club. That's a club I want to join. Let's hear from Simone.
Chuck, that's a club I want to join.
I literally just said that. I like her better than you. The new Subway series. What's your pick?
The Real Real, authenticated luxury from Gucci, Rolex, Prada, Louis Vuitton, Hermes, Cartier, Tiffany, and more. Find your real. Hundreds of luxury brands, up to 90% off retail, only at The Real Real. Shop now and get 20% off at TheRealReal.com. Terms apply.
Save yourself. Money with farmers?
That's not wrong. When you bundle your home and auto policies with farmers, you save yourself up to 20%.
That's something.
You know, a whole lot of something with farmers. Kind of creepy.
We are farmers. Bum, 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 bum.
With 1 month to go before the midterms, the GOP hammering home the message that your safety is in peril with Democrats in power. New data from the FBI backs that up. Murder rates jumped more than 4% last year. That doesn't factor in some of the nation's largest Democratic-run cities like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia. Even though Democrat policies are to blame, President Biden is trying to flip the script and pin the deep on the police movement on Republicans, actually. Biden's deputy press secretary telling Fox, Biden inherited a rising violent crime rate. Every Republican in Congress voted against the critical funding we delivered to stop the police layoffs happening all over the country. Judge, it's Republicans' fault. They didn't give enough money to Biden's agenda.
You know, that is so infuriating. And, you know, you just have to, at this point, it's a question of faith, you know, de fide. Do you either believe him or you don't? I don't believe him. Obviously, what he's referring to with that, the Republicans voting against funding the police, was like a slush fund that was included in their legislation for the pandemic, where you could use funds for certain things, but there was no requirement and there was no restriction. But it was the Dems who were quiet during the summer of 2020 as people were getting businesses burned, people getting killed, and precincts getting burned down. It was the Democrats who were yelling defund the police. And Cory Bush just a couple days ago wants to double down on it. And it's in Democrat cities where the mayors control the police departments where we've got the biggest problems in this country. And the fact that you've got New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Philadelphia won't even give their number of crimes to the FBI tells me that that increase in murders of 4.2% is probably double what they're saying it is. And so it's a shell game where they're just saying, no, we never said that, you said it.
And Kamala, why is not a mystery? The polling is terrible for Democrats on crime.
But isn't that interesting? I was surprised when I saw that abortion, inflation, immigration, all
I was surprised too.
Take a back seat to crime.
When they were then
job of government,
they were gonna blow it.
Safe. And to make them feel safe. Like you say, you can't walk the tax department so a couple of blocks away because you're afraid that something's going to happen. You know, it's people have to have a sense of well-being, that society's going to take care of you, that the criminals will be suppressed and apprehended and prosecuted. And when that starts falling apart, it's very, very concerning to me. And I hate that what Democrats have done to cops. I have so many cop friends, and to see that how they feel beleaguered, they feel assailed. by Democrats.
Jesse, the only other thing that I can ever see Joe Biden talk about when it comes to crime is to tie it to guns. So his answer to a rising crime rate is gun control.
Yeah. Well, they're saying that Republicans don't want to vote for the assault weapons ban, right? And that's what he's for. But yeah, they don't want that. They want to keep their AR-15s. This guy, Philip Bump, do you know him at the Washington Post? Yeah. This guy's such a knucklehead. He writes this article, "Crime is Surging in Fox News Coverage," because our guy, Gianno Caldwell, went around and tried to confront a bunch of Democrats and ask them about the crime crisis. This guy, Bump, comes out, writes this whole piece in the Post. There is no crime crisis, he's saying. He's saying it's just anecdotal. Fox is just throwing up a bunch of videos. He goes, the crime rate's not up, crime rate's down, it's not a big deal, and it's not a major issue. There's like all these other issues that are more important than crime. It's a top 3 issue of every single survey they do. This guy's a coward, Philip Bump. I dare him to come on my show. I dare you, Philip Bump, whatever you want.
Come on, Philip.
He's a liar, too. He's a liar. He knows, and he won't be able to defend this column.
But you know, if you look at Democrat candidates, look at Fetterman in Pennsylvania, wants to let go a third of inmates. Go to New Hampshire and you look at Ron Johnson's opponent. He's trying to glorify criminals as well. You look at Adam Laxalt in Nevada. You know, the law enforcement endorsed the incumbent before, and now they've switched and they've endorsed him. Biden can say whatever he wants. Go talk to any law enforcement officer on the street, and they will tell you exactly who is responsible for the crime rate. It's not Republicans. It's Biden, and it's every one of those Democrat governors that push for defund the police to start with.
So good luck with this, trying to pin it on Republicans. Hey, the fastest, it's up next.
To New York City, that's next.
Real.
Story, and some of it is from the reaction of our own viewers, and some of it is sort of my muscle memory, admittedly from a different time in politics. But I don't think the problem for Herschel Walker is that he had one and wanted 2 abortions. I think the problem for Herschel Walker is that what is before the voters of Georgia is his extreme views on abortion in the final 5 weeks. And the reason we know that is such a loser for Republicans is because people like Blake Masters are taking their abortion positions off the website. The reason we know they know it's a loser.
She's the baddest newscaster around. She'll say stuff that you're scared to say.
Ahead of the midterms, Charlie.
Well, my reaction to the New York Times story is that it is highly unlikely that any Georgia Republican official was in any way surprised by it, or that this will make any difference to them, because they are all in on the hypocrisy. So the Republicans have 3 major problems with Herschel Walker on the abortion issue. They have the extremism, which they have locked into. They have the lies. Herschel Walker, continues to lie about this. Nobody believes his lies, and I think that's going to continue to unravel. And they have the hypocrisy. And I think that what we are seeing now is that the Republican Party is making explicit what's been implicit now for a few years, is that it's really not about principle. It's not about character. It's not about some moral issue here. It's all about power. And I think that sort of naked position is really going to be problematic for them with swing voters. And I'm glad you mentioned Michigan, because you look at the state of Michigan, which was really very, very closely divided in the presidential election. This was it. This was a state that Donald Trump won back in 2016. And look what's happening now, how that state is slipping away from Republicans. And this is an issue that is really driving it. But when it comes to Herschel Walker, I think that I guess one of the reasons why I'm cynical and jaded is not just watching voters being lied to, not just seeing this hypocrisy on display, but seeing the entire Republican Party and the vast majority of Republican voters saying, and yeah, we're okay with that. That's something that we are willing to embrace. And we always wondered what Donald Trump would do to American political culture. I mean, the man's a chronic liar and a hypocrite. He's now institutionalized it in the Republican Party, and you see it in the most dramatic and in many ways ludicrous ways with somebody like Herschel Walker, who they're all in trying to get a seat in the United States Senate.
It's so true, Charlie. I mean, there was the post slogan, democracies die in darkness. I mean, they actually take their last breaths with all the lights on, and Republicans just shrugging their shoulders and saying, oh, well, this is what the base wants. Michelle and Charlie are not going anywhere. We have to sneak in a quick break. We'll all be right back.
We're investing in Oregon's economic future. So, no matter how you play the Oregon lottery, you're playing it forward for all of us. Lottery games are based on chance and should be played for entertainment only.
If you order new furniture but were told you gotta wait, you might not have to. Rife has over $5 million of inventory in stock and ready for immediate delivery. Why wait? Shop